As I'm sure everyone in this room is aware, a very historic event occurred in January of this year with the Orthodox Church jurisdictions throughout the Ukraine. When I saw this in the news, I went through the list of people who had attended some of the 5 previous meetings that we've had of the society, looking for someone in the Ukrainian Orthodox jurisdiction that happened to actually, be interested in this kind of thing here too. And fortunately, when I emailed Father Mark, he very graciously said he actually had a significant knowledge and inside information on the process and was willing to share what he knows and what he's learned about the Orthodox reunification in Ukraine. And so, without any further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Father Mark and thank him very much for coming this evening and preparing.
You're welcome. Thank you. Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
Christos voskres.
Christ
is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
I'm not one of those that do all those 50,000 languages. It's too difficult.
3 is good.
3 is good, right? 3 is good. But, my name is Father Mark, and I am originally from Chicago area. I moved out to Pittsburgh probably now it's going on since, it's in 1996. It's either, in 1995. It's either to put it that way, so I'm not my wife is a math professor, so I can't, I don't do math very quickly. But this is my Palimatka Stephanie, my oldest daughter Victoria, my youngest daughter Anna. We live in the Green Tree section of Pittsburgh, and my church is in Arnold, New Kensington area, Holy Virgin, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or it's sometimes known as Pokrova. And we're a small congregation out there. I've always been a bivocational priest. I worked in over 25 years in the information security for various companies around Pittsburgh, everything from AT&T to, it's not called Mellon Bank anymore. I think it's Bank of New York Mellon, but they, as many institutions, just change names all the time. But got burned out from that after about 25 years in information security. But well before that, I always knew that this calling, that a priest or a deacon or a clergy person has, it never ends. And so I told my wife, you know what, I'm not done going to school. I'm going to start studying diaconate studies. So I was fortunate to take diaconate studies at the Antiochian Village in Ligonier, and then continue on, and finally my Master of Divinity from St. Sophia's Ukrainian Orthodox Seminary in South Bolingbrook, New Jersey. Along with that, I told my bishop, I love the parish. I want a little small one if you got one, so he put me in Arnold, but you really can't get any smaller than that. That's all right. It's very good. It's a quaint little church over there, and I'm just down the street from my Ukrainian Catholic brother, Father Yaroslav Kowal, and him and I not only look alike, but we had a really good rapport with one another. And on top of that, I am a chaplain at Torrance State Mental Hospital out in Blairsville. So that now I don't consider it a job anymore, but this is my career now that I'm in. Because a job I think is one of those that you get up in the morning and dread and you hate going to. And I think after finally all this time, I found what I want to do. I wouldn't call myself a subject expert on this by any means. I am a very, very simple person. As you can see, my daughter's running the electronic equipment there. I go back to old-fashioned paper, or Father said, what'd you say, the scroll and, what'd you say?
Papyrus.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more advanced than that. But I can text, and I can talk on the phone, and that's about it. But other than that, computers are good, but it's just, it's not my thing anymore. After being, like I said, 20 years in information security, done with computers. Anyways, I am blessed to have, as I guess on my speed dial and my texting capabilities, my Metropolitan Antony and my Archbishop, His Eminence Daniel. They respond back with an instant when I ask them questions, and they were right along here telling me what I should or should not say. And really they said, you say anything you want, just, and then not this on a serious note, they said, just, we're not out here to badmouth the other side. You know, we're not out here to badmouth, Moscow or any other jurisdiction that doesn't, really approve or care that we did this particular feat. But anyways, my Archbishop said, just keep it truthful, keep it simple, and really, whatever I'm going to tell you this evening cannot probably not be found on the internet or websites. Everything that I'm about to tell you or share with you is out there. I do have personal opinion about things, but we don't have to get into personal opinions unless we have time later and we can have an open discussion about it. But nonetheless, I received a blessing from my Metropolitan to stand here tonight and to speak about this. And we're going to see later on an impromptu, I guess, interview, perhaps if you will, that I had with Archbishop Daniel just a couple weeks ago when we were able to get together at a retreat over in Villa Maria, PA, and you know where that is. Which is
we know it well.
Yeah.
Over the border, right?
Precisely, exactly. It's right there. He popped in. My girl and I, my youngest son, my kid and I were coming back from lunch after eating, and all of a sudden we look and we're like, okay, here comes this entourage of black, and here's the Archbishop with probably 10, well, maybe 8 seminarians with them. And it's like, wow, I guess our afternoon agenda is going to be...
Black SUVs?
They all, no, you know what? They all pile into one van nowadays, They've got 8 drivers.
I immediately think IRS, Homeland Security.
Yeah, right?
We also
right?
have tinted windows.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay. Once again, this is all taken from the website. If you type in Tomos, T-O-M-O-S, so if you type in current situation in Ukraine or Orthodoxy or anything like that, the signing, autocephaly, any one of those, you're gonna probably pull up a lot of these same things. But nonetheless, I put together a few slides that I think might be highlighting or talking points on what I'm about to say. And like I said, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a memorizer. My comprehension in school was very, very short, so I didn't memorize things at length, what I want to say, so forgive me for looking down on paper, but I just want to make sure that I keep the facts straight. So, and I would ask you, if you ask me any questions, accept my answer of I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and try to make something up if you have questions, but by all means ask questions or we can save them to later. But if I say I don't know, I don't know. But we can certainly try to find out the answer. But okay. This was the biggest thing that came out probably, I would say back, around the beginning of 2018. And we knew when we all got this on our phones that, wow, the announcement of the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarch must be really important here. But this process took place, as was mentioned earlier, it was in January of this year. But this started a long time ago. The public announcement, the public, knowledge of all this started taking place in January of this year, a little bit before that actually. But this was going back all the way to 2016. The bishops were starting to get together. The bishops were starting to meet and say, you know what, let's have an audience with the patriarch and this and that and the other thing. So it took a good 2 years to finally get this thing revved up and to finally get to the patriarch where we can, where they had a one-on-one conversation with him and told him what's going on. And, that was in 2016, but even things before that, like I said, I wasn't going to be negative on this, but certain influential powers that the Ukrainians never cared for, Russia, Putin and his predecessors, they never, and it's not just them recently. Your history, Ukraine is it was the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine was a vital part. Dare I say, the Soviet Union could probably done without Estonia, and I don't want to get personal, but they could, maybe do without Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania perhaps, but if you take away Ukraine, they got nothing. And so what they would do is it even turned into political power where they tried to, constantly have their influence on Ukraine in politics, and of course the church. The church was no exception. the church never really did escape any, persecution by any means. So this was started a long time ago. But what really, I think, started breaking the camel's back, that straw, was when Russia came into Crimea in 2014 and wanted to annex them and take them back into the Russian fold, which they were very successful at. Then they started, they saw what happened there, then they started slowly moving more eastern parts of Ukraine and was taking over certain areas. And finally, they came to a culmination of, that's enough. We can't take that. Not only our border is changing and some of our land is now going away, but, our churches are now falling into all these different categories, which we'll get into before. But the main reason that they brought the patriarch in, and the patriarch has always been with us, but one of the main reasons they brought Patriarch Bartholomew into all of this was because of the fact, our bishops made a plea. Now, when I say our bishops, I'm not just talking, the bishops in America, because we have two. We have Metropolitan Antony, we have Archbishop Daniel. And when their eminences went in to, meet, they brought in other bishops as well from Europe and Ukraine to talk about them. But the main thing that they pled, as their case was, they wanted one single united church in Ukraine. It's bad enough that, Orthodox people try to say, well, we got to unite, the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Greeks, the Serbians, Moldavian, all the people. But when they look at Ukraine like, you want to get with all of us, but you people are running around with 3 Orthodox jurisdictions yourself in Ukraine. Who are we going to unite with? Who are which one is the true Orthodox Church in Ukraine? So that was the main plea that they made in front of Patriarch Bartholomew, was to, we need one single unified church in Ukraine, one single autocephalous, I should say. Now this word autocephaly comes in. And so that's what they were starting to see. Everyone know what autocephaly is? It's self-ruling, self-governing, if you will. We'll just use the word autocephaly. It's not the easiest word to pronounce, but you see a person in Ukraine, I'll follow that. Yes.
Does autocephaly automatically create a patriarchate?
Well, I guess it depends whose Tomos or whose document you're reading. I'm going to speak a little bit on the Ukrainian document because it got really, really fine clarification in there on some things, but they left some things out. For example, Serbia, when they had their Tomos written, their document written, it was open-ended where they want to be part of the Constantinople Church, but they want to have the right to have their own patriarch. Serbia did that. Romania did that. The Czech people did that. The Slovak Orthodox Church did that. And they wanted to have their own patriarch. But, of course, with this, now with the Ukrainians, what they did was everything, they're autocephalous, but everything goes back to Patriarch Bartholomew in Istanbul. So, and if I change those words around, they can be Constantinople, Istanbul. Those are the same places. I think they became Istanbul after the Turks fell in the 1920s or something like that. Yes.
Just
Please.
as a note there, in the Catholic Church, there are 23 Eastern churches which are technically self-ruling.
Okay.
Except for the Oriental Congregation or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as I call it. But be that as it may, the Ukrainian Catholic Church has not appointed a patriarch, even though it's one of the largest, at one time was the largest Eastern Catholic
Right.
Church, simply because they didn't want to muddy the waters. The Ukrainians, among all of Eastern Christians that I know, both Catholic and Orthodox,
Right.
are really serious about wanting to get back together, and that's what our society is about. So, I mean, I give them credit. They
Right.
just have a major archbishop.
Right.
They figured with everything that's going on, you appoint another patriarch, it just makes things more
Well,
difficult.
precisely. And right now, literally, as we celebrate, the Orthodox celebrate Bright Monday now. All of Lent's done, Pascha's over. Thank God, today's the day to, I can rest, I can make my cup of coffee, I can sit home, I can sleep in until 9. Well, if I didn't have church in the morning, But it's just like, this is the period right now. This Tomos has been granted, and now we got to see where all these chips are going to fall and how everything's going to play out, and let this really start settling in the world right now, what's going on, because it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And it's just like now everybody has to just, let's take one thing at a time, more meetings, of course, more discussions, more, synods, I'm sure, and whatnot. But yeah, now I think it's just that waiting period to see what's going to happen and to let things start falling, where they can. So, like I mentioned earlier, there are 3 jurisdictions in Ukraine. There's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate, and then there was the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, which we'll get to a chart a little bit later, but just keep in mind when I said before that there was 3 jurisdictions in Ukraine. The last 2 that I mentioned, the Kievan Patriarchate and the Autocephalous Orthodox Church, they never were recognized in world orthodoxy, so to speak. Yes, we existed. When I say we, because I was always part of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church here in America, but they were never recognized. And really what they always looked at was that Moscow, whenever things would happen and whenever, questions were made about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they always went to the Moscow Patriarchate. That was like their recognized one. And so those were the spokespeople, I guess, if you will. But what I was going to say, and then I did a little bit more research today, the Polish Orthodox and the Serbian Orthodox Church immediately rejected all of this that was starting to take place. And they made it very well known amongst the Orthodox bishops around there that they didn't like this. But I just read today that Poland, I don't know about Serbia, but Poland now, the Polish Orthodox have finally accepted what's going on and are willing to, I guess, just live with it, if you will. But they have accepted, so they're no longer one of those that are opposing what's going on. Now, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm not making anyone take notes, and I'm not making anybody start memorizing this, but believe it or not, as anything, there's huge, long timelines of history because that's what we need to know. Why are we here in 2019? But we have to go back all the way to the Apostle Andrew. So those of you who don't know, just to refresh your memory, Andrew the Apostle, upon seeing the Dnipro River, which was the river in Ukraine that flows all through Kiev and throughout the majority of Ukraine, he was the one who once looked upon those hills of Kiev and said, this is going to be a holy nation one day. This is where the center of orthodoxy is going to be. And of course, the apostles, everyone was sent to their own areas, but Andrew is the one who I guess got appointed to go to Ukraine. And so my church is very lucky to have an icon depicting on the top of my iconostas of Andrew looking out with proclaiming to the people that, and it's just one of those things where it's worth mentioning that he was the one who first saw this. So you'll see a lot of churches in Ukraine with the St. Andrew. But anyways, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but of course the Cyrillic alphabet became very important. Saint Olga and Volodymyr. Volodymyr is the Ukrainian name, of course, for Vladimir. So that's, if you see Volodymyr, that's Vladimir. And Olga, of course, is Ukrainian for Olga. They're the ones who accepted. They're the ones who, when they sent that envoy on, you see it quoted all the time, their delegates said, we don't know if we're in heaven or earth when they visited Hagia Sophia. And so that was back in 955, but in 988, that's the date right now that you'll hear a lot of talk about, because that is the actual baptismal date. And let me just add something very small that I learned from Archbishop when we were talking about different things. This wasn't one day event. This wasn't let's baptize Ukraine and boom, we're done. This took years. This took actually years to baptize. You can't baptize an entire nations of people in one day. So that's why 988 to 1240 is when you saw all these big, heavy hitter churches. They were built, all the way back then. And so, of course, 1051, the first metropolitan Illyrion is enthroned in Kiev and all of Rus. All right. And then we just keep going through on the timeline. And like I said, I'm not going to go through every single one of these. But 1415 is interesting because Moscow Church formally separated from the Kievan Metropolitanate. And in 1448, Moscow Metropolitans bear the title Metropolitan of Moscow. They no longer, wanted to be that Metropolitan of Kiev and all of Rus. And so that's when now you see this tinge way back when of Moscow finally, starting to maybe let's move these headquarters somewhere else. Of course, we see the fall of the Turks happen after that, and the church further separates. And then you got your Union of Brest, which brings now the Polish people into all of this with repression and domination and whatnot. And the Polacks, of course, Polish, I'm sorry. That's what I was afraid of. I'm sorry. Oh, Polyaki and Ukrainian, so I'm just thinking in my head, that's what I call Ukringlish, just like half English, half Ukrainian. The Polish, became, where was I? All those poor Polish. Creating the Greek Catholic Church. So, that's 1596, and this was very interesting. Russia and all of its wisdom. 1685, I found out Moscow purchases the jurisdiction over the Kievan Metropolitan from the Patriarch of Moscow for 120 sable furs and 200 pieces of gold. Wow, talk about a bribe, right? And I'm sure back then it was absolutely
Prices
amazing.
have gone up since the time of Judas.
I'm telling you, geez, okay. So 1721, now we're starting to get, I think, into a little bit more of the history I like from 1700s on. They're forcibly reduced to the status of an eparchy in the reorganized Russian Orthodox Holy Synod. And so to be reduced from an eparchy, from what they once were, was pretty major stuff. And so by 1800s, your Ukrainian church, the Kievan church, ceases to exist, except for the underground. And by then, Russians say no more Russian, and the Ukrainian language is banned in 1863. All right, a couple more just the history, because you got to know your history before you can get into why things happen now. 1921, the Sobor, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Kiev, ordains its metropolitan, which was by the name of Vasil Lipkivsky, and he was shot dead, of course, in 1937 by the NKVD, which is the Russian mafia.
Predecessor to
KGB.
Yeah, predecessor to KGB.
KGB.
Yeah. I don't know a nicer way to put it, exactly. And so he was the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and then that's when the persecution of all the clergy began. And we've seen those old-timey footages where they're ripping down the church bell towers and ripping the icons out of the church, setting them on fire, and then that whole thing. Of course, communism is already taking place by this time in Russia, so they don't have any, politically, there's no use for the church at that. But 1924, that Tomos was issued. That was the first Tomos. The Tomos was issued by His Holiness Gregorius VII, which reestablishing the historic Kievan Rus, or Ukrainian, synonymous words, Kievan Rus and Ukrainian, the Metropolitan as the Autocephalous Church. And then in 24, I kept on there, I thought was interesting because this Metropolitan Vasil Lipkivsky sends Metropolitan John Theodorovich to head our church here in the North America, or as we call it in South Bound Brook, New Jersey. Metropolitan John was our very first hierarch that we had here in America, and very, very loving, personable Admiral man. Not that I met him, but there's lots of testimonies and our archives in South Bound Brook, New Jersey at our consistory has these speeches that they recorded in their quality back then, but yet his voice, he was truly a leader. And I think that's why they chose him to come here to North America. But then afterwards, 44, after World War II, many of the bishops of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church fled to the west. These bishops were being persecuted like crazy over there. 1944 wasn't the best of time. You're in war-torn Europe, and this Bishop Mstislav, what's his name, Skripnik, and he came here. First went to Canada, he was sent, but then he's like, Canada's nice. I want to go to America. I want to see what this America is all about. So he came to South Bound Brook, New Jersey. Metropolitan Mstislav, I had the opportunity, I was a little kid, but I had the opportunity to meet and serve with him a couple times in my young altar boy days. And he wasn't as soft-spoken as Metropolitan John was. Mstislav was one of those fist pounders. He leaned on that podium in church and it was constantly pounding his fist. And when he talked, you shut up. He had that room. He was a politician. He was a politician, but but he knew what he was talking about. I truly in my heart believe that he only did it because of his mother Ukraine, and that he loved his land so much. But we have to also remember, I don't know if you know of like the great Cossack era of Ukraine, the Cossacks, the freedom fighters. Metropolitan Mstislav was descended as a nephew of, his uncle was Petlura. If anyone know Hetman, they called him Hetman, not Hitman, but Hetmanin, the heads of the Cossack tribes, you know, the grand poobahs who everybody listened to. Taras Bulba, anyone remember that movie? Okay, that was the Hetman over there and whatnot. But Mstislav was descended from that, so he was carrying on that legacy of his uncle, Petlura, who was a freedom fighter for Ukraine. Because Mstislav would not give a sermon. I don't care what the holiday, I don't care what the sermon in the gospel was that Sunday, he'll somehow tie Mother Ukraine and her freedom into that sermon. And that's no lie. You know, and everything was Nasho, Ukraine, everything about our Ukraine and whatnot. But he was strict, but he was good. And if it wasn't for Metropolitan, probably Mstislav, we wouldn't be here today. Because he had vision. And when, you know, back then, God bless these people, they bought land. They had visions, let's buy land across the street, you know, here, there. And he is the one who really is the founder, I guess, if you will, who had this vision of our Metropolia Center now in South Bolingbrook, New Jersey. And so it has the Memorial Church, of course, which he dedicated to all of those famine victims of 1932-33. He never forgot them. And, you know, he dedicated that entire grounds to the holy people of Ukraine that was, you know, now need to be remembered here. The cemetery is unbelievable, just as your church here, or the chapel with all the relics. The cemetery, you start walking through these graves, these monuments are magnificent of the legacies, and it gives not just here lies so-and-so, this date and that date. I mean, this gives like, these people chisel in the history of their Ukrainian ancestors. They're proud of it. And so Mstislav is the one who we thank for that. Mstislav only also wanted Ukrainian spoken in America, which that was one of those personal times I'm just going to put my opinion in. I think because it's very poignant, I think. I'm not saying he chased the youth away, but when you are that young, you know, and you don't understand Ukrainian or don't have the opportunity to learn it. In my case, my father, you know, married my mother in 1965, but only everything was spoken in English. I'm sorry, Ukrainian back then. And it's like, okay, who wants to go to a church if you don't understand their language? But Mstislav was one of those, everything has to be in Ukrainian language. Not that I said he demised the church, but they should have started thinking a long time ago, like our bishops are today, like, okay, we're in America, guess what language we might want to start talking in, you know, but nonetheless, as I said, 1950 through 91 was really, I'll call it the growth of our Autocephalous Orthodox Church here in the United States. 1990, you know, was not a bad year for him. The Sobor held in Kiev elected him to patriarch, if you will, and he became the leader of all the Ukrainian Orthodox faithful throughout the world. Metropolitan Fered left Moscow Patriarchate at the time and remained in the Kievan Patriarchate, and the election of Metropolitan Volodymyr became the new primate of Moscow's church in Ukraine. Here's now where all the things start breaking away. Mstislav kept it together. They voted him unanimously to be the leader of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. If he was still alive, or, you know, if things went a different way and they would have re-elected someone after him, which they did, but it never took, they respected Metropolitan Mstislav so much for what the things I just told you about, you know, coming from a very nationalistic family and being a freedom fighter for Ukraine and whatnot. He was unanimously elected. And it's one of those moments where, you know, everyone knew when Kennedy died. Well, when Mstislav became Metropolitan, or the Patriarch of Ukraine, you knew where you were that day. The phone started blowing up. I remember I was having lunch with a priest friend of mine. I wasn't a priest then, but in Chicago, And it's just like, oh my gosh, you're not gonna know what happened just now. And it's just like, you know, everybody started talking about what was going on, but for him to be, you know, you figure, this was one of those instances where they had that Tomos, but they had went ahead and elected, who has a patriarch? Who has, can we elect our own patriarch? Yes. So this was one of those instances where they kind of disregarded, I guess, if you will, that Tomos in 1924 and went and elected Patriarch Mstislav. But, so, okay, and the last real quick here, of the history part, unfortunately that didn't last for more than close to 3 years. And he reposed, and they elected this new patriarch, Volodymyr. He was descended from the Kievan Patriarchate as Ukraine's second patriarch. That did not last very long whatsoever. But in 95, our church here in the USA enters in communion with the Patriarchate of Constantinople under Bartholomew, who's the ecumenical patriarch now, which distanced themselves from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. You know, once they elected this second guy, Patriarch Volodymyr, they decided in America, our bishops, like, okay, that's enough. We don't want to really be part of that because they didn't feel that things were maybe canonically being done in the right way. And so they allowed this ecumenical patriarch to issue new Greek bishopric sees under the direct control, which just means like our Metropolitan Antony was like Metropolitan Antony of Iliopolis, or Bishop Daniel of, and I forgot where they put him and whatnot. But it's like to show that we had our allegiance to Patriarch Bartholomew once again here in America. Bartholomew said, okay, if you are Ukrainian bishops, but I'm going to put these like titles on you of your patriarch, you know, what just like it says, the Greek bishopric sees, you know, you're now bishop of this area. It's just sort of like in name only kind of thing. And just that note real quick of 1924, you know, it was issued by Patriarch Gregorius, as we mentioned earlier, to the Orthodox Church of Poland, but due to the political circumstances and the partitions that happened and whatnot between the wars, the ancient Kievan Metropolia was located within Poland. And in this Tomos, the previous transfer of the Kievan Church to the jurisdiction of Moscow was declared uncanonical, and the independence of the Kievan Metropolitanate, meaning Ukrainian Orthodox Church, was fully restored. Make sense? Let's do it again, right? No. This is how hairy. This is how balled up it gets. I mean, this isn't. You would think church could be so easy, you know. You know, you have your bishops and your metropolitan and your patriarch and the whole hierarchy, but it gets so, you know, this territory, that territory, this land, that land. The war starts. Now it's, you know, I'm no longer Poland. I'm back in Ukraine. Now tomorrow I'm back in Poland. You know, it's yeah.
Okay, so there's a Tomos from the ecumenical patriarch issued in 1924, which is essentially what just happened again.
Precisely.
Now, okay, the other patriarchs who are appointed here are outside or in opposition to or not under that Tomos? Is that what happened?
Right. And
Okay, and what was the ideal? Was that a version put up to...
They never wanted to recognize Metropolitan Mstislav because he was part of the underground Ukrainian. He was being persecuted. All those bishops back then were being persecuted. They actually, Metropolitan Mstislav, well, Bishop Mstislav at the time, in 1944, when he was a consecrated bishop, was done in a basement of a home with bishops that were meeting in secret to do that, to lay their hands on him. So when Mstislav came to this country, they said, the people, not the Americans, but the other Orthodox churches said, who is this Bishop Mstislav? He's not canonical. He wasn't even ordained correctly. How in the world can he be a bishop? He never had the proper service done on him. And so when he came here, he became reordained under Constantinople, under the patriarch from there. And so that's when he became canonical. See, Mstislav always, you know, I told you, he was a freedom fighter in Ukraine, but he always knew, but he didn't preach it a lot to us at the time, that really our mother church was always Constantinople. It was of course never the Moscow Patriarchate, and it never was, you know, any of the other jurisdictions. But he didn't, I don't say he kept it quiet on purpose, but he knew it would start creating this schism, like, we are Ukrainians, what are you talking about? We're going under this Greek bishop now. And that's exactly what happened back, I would say, when did all that scandal start? About in the 90s. You know, in our churches, we're starting to break away left and right because this movement was starting to slowly come up. Our bishops were finally starting to say, you know, no, we're not Greek, we are Ukrainian. You know, every ethnic group needs to keep its identity. But you know what? We really belong to the Greek church. When it goes back to this Tomos and when it goes back to the Patriarchate, we belong, you know, really with the Greeks and whatnot.
But isn't that why Bartholomew and the Archbishop of Constantinople traditionally keeps that ecumenical title? It might happen to be Greek, okay? And all of these, as we would say, Byzantine, small b, you know,
Right.
Greek style of worship, even though the various languages come in. Why? You're right, it's full of politics. People want to misread
Yeah.
history and tradition. Didn't mean that Bartholomew or whomever was going to dictate
Yeah.
Constantinople.
No, it was awful back in the 90s. I mean, you thought the Greeks were coming in and going to start a food festival in every one of our parishes. That wasn't the case. No, honest to gosh. I mean, yeah, really, you know. But that's how the Ukrainians started treating it, and but it just took time. It took time for our people to start understanding really what we're doing. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Deacon Meyer.
You talked a lot about Patriarch Islam. Can you talk about facilities?
No, why don't you talk about him for a little bit? You probably know much more than I would about him.
Well,
What time?
I'm a Ukrainian Catholic, turned Catholic deacon. The thing is about Basilikis, which I'm just, what a hero, what a martyr for the faith. If you look at, from my perspective, the Ukrainian autocephalous movement in Ukraine was a movement of the underdog, a freedom spirit that could not be conquered. He was criticized as not being canonical because all of the bishops that were available at that time in his particular church were either killed, they were not available to yet consecrate a succeeding bishop. So what they had done was an extraordinary consecration with his priest. And people looked at that, oh, you can't do that.
Right.
It was called survival.
Precisely,
They
and that's what they
survived. And we
did.
saw what happened to him.
We saw.
But yeah, so he is, when we talk about Patriarch Islam, in my opinion, Basil was the real martyr and the hero of today's
Of
movement.
course, sure. I appreciate you giving a much better explanation than I ever could.
Yeah.
Father, thank you, Father Myron.
One of the subtexts of this controversy is the historic disagreement between Constantinople and Moscow about who really is the ecumenical patriarch. Because
Oh, Moscow's the new Rome, did you know? It's the
Third
third
Rome.
Rome. We're the Third Rome, as they say in Ukraine. You know, they're the third
we're
Rome.
all standing with Rome. We're standing with the original one. The Archbishop of Constantinople is standing with the next one. And there's a reason why the Tsar was called the Tsar, because he was the new Caesar.
Precisely.
So, and
Exactly.
so when Moscow is screaming six ways to Sunday, part of it is who really is the ecumenical patriarch,
Right.
is it not?
Right. You know, I think of that old medieval Knights of the Round Table, right? King Arthur sitting among, you're the first among equals. And, you know, just think about it, first among the equals. I mean, something's wrong, but that's how, you know, Bartholomew, you know, the ecumenical patriarch, as Father just said, you know, he looks himself, you know, as the first among those equals. All right, and then I really skipped a little bit more between 95 down to 2019, but finally we have the Ukrainian Orthodox Church by Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I, and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is finally now recognized. Well, the first church was always recognized under Bartholomew, but this new church, there's no more Moscow Patriarch. Well, there is and not. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I'm wondering, you mentioned three historical periods here in the last century. So we have the Tomos of 1924, we have the events of 1990, and we have the events of the last year. Could you briefly just say, I mean, obviously the key player is Moscow and Constantinople, but could you rattle off who are the supporters of each of those two at each of those periods? So in 1924, who's supporting Moscow and who's supporting Constantinople and its almost? who supported who in the 90s and who supported who
In
today,
my-
or what changes have occurred?
I kind of have a slide towards the end that might give a good explanation of who kind of aligned themselves. Not, I don't know, 1924 so much, but I think pretty much who aligned themselves when this chart was made. It was kind of like how it was back then as well. We'll get I think a better picture here in a bit if we can just hold on to that. But anyways, the Moscow Patriarchate, the Kievan Patriarchate, the Autocephalous Orthodox Church, all now becomes what they call this OCU, as if we need another acronym, but they call themselves the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And Metropolitan Epiphanos becomes this new hierarch just weeks ago, well, months now, but he becomes the new hierarch of Kiev and all Ukraine. Epiphanos, I think, is the Greek rendering, Epiphany, and I heard even bishops calling him Metropolitan Epiphany, which I guess that is the same name, but Epiphany sounds more Slavic, I guess, than adding that IOS at the end. So, all right, we could start getting into some interesting things here. This is more like, we're done with the timelines, we're done with the test for today.
Well,
now we can look at more pictures.
I think your timelines are excellent. Can you talk about the significance of Ukrainian independence? I think it's something that, when you talk like 1924,
Okay.
there was no independent Ukraine. In 1991 there was, and that's something I think really, that was a game changer.
Well, yeah, that, and there was also, you know, those celebrations that took place like that, the baptismal, the baptism of Ukraine in 988, because now, I mean, the most recent, it didn't die. I mean, this past what? When did we celebrate 1,030 years? Was it this past summer or the summer before? But it was like one of those things where, you know, the Moscow Patriarch wasn't allowed to come to the celebration in Kiev or whatever. So he like literally had his little pouting fit and went home because they didn't want him any parts of that. But I think throughout these, you know, when there's these national type of celebrations, you know, it's really one of those like, okay, who's coming, who's not, who's bowing out at the last minute, you know, and whatnot. But of course you have these tensions such as, you know, Ukrainians will always say it's been an independent Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has always been, you know, yeah, we know it's been under persecutions and sufferings and whatnot under various time periods. But, you know, you ask a Ukrainian and it's like, yeah, you have these nationalistic, you know, views of Independence Day, and you have these nationalistic views of you know, the different things. Like, you know, in my own town in Arnold, it's these nationalistic holidays that bring us together. I mean, obviously, I unfortunately can celebrate a divine liturgy with the Ukrainian Catholic priest, nor him with I, but yet you have Independence Day, and it's like, boom, we're together. Whether it be his place or our place, or yesterday with their Sviatchena, their after Easter dinner. It was our Easter, but they invited our parish. It's these things that bring us together that, you know, I think it really, they put a lot, Ukrainians, I think, put some things aside when it comes to a lot, but it's things like Independence Day or other national holidays that also pull us together as one. So we have here this Tomos that we're talking about, and of course, no Tomos could be complete without, you know, the entourage of bishops and whatnot. This was actually around January of this year, the 5th and the 6th. What's interesting is, they're in, you know where they are? They're in Constantinople, or Istanbul. How do you know?
Because they're wearing suits.
This is our bishop.
Say
This is
it's
Bishop Daniel. This is Bishop Daniel. What's he wearing? A little snazzy little suit. You know, this is the other bishops right
There's
here.
no snow.
There's no, you can't dress as clergy in Istanbul.
Except for the ecumenical patriarch, I think.
And that's why I think they gave him, this is Metropolitan Epiphany right here. They let him, I see, wear a cassock. But when Poroshenko, this is Petro Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, with his dear wife,
Marina.
I was going to say Helena, but thank you. Anyways, yeah, that's the interesting thing. You have to, when you go out in public, out in the Fanar or wherever, you cannot wear your cassock. I mean, it's just against the law to do that. So there's our Bishop Daniel waiting in line to greet, you know, President of Ukraine right there. Okay. Well, they made it inside the church, and this is, these titles are very just vague, but yet it just kind of gives you an idea what's going on. I didn't put a lot of comments on a lot of these pictures, but I don't know, the pictures look pretty. So the solemn ceremony taking place in the Patriarchal Church of St. George in Istanbul. And neat. And then, of course, there you have President Poroshenko. He came in and he made his way with the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew right here, and he thanked him for what was happening. And I think in one of his speeches, I don't know exactly which one, but President Poroshenko said, you know, you want to go, he made it very well known, you want to go back to the Moscow, you who were with the Moscow Patriarchate, if you want them, no one's stopping you. We're not going to think any less of you. You know, we're not going to think anything more of you. You want to join us? Great. If not, we're not holding you back. You know, if that's who you've been with all your life, and you know, and things change and whatnot, you know, we're not going to hold that against you, that you want to stay with them. So he encouraged them for, you know, those who wanted to can remain with the Moscow Patriarchate. But what was interesting is this is the man, the president who made, I guess if you will, the new history of Ukraine. He is going to be the one, unfortunately he lost in his election just a couple weeks ago, but he is the one who is going to go down in the history books. I believe in my readings that I was doing, they're actually calling him the new Saint Vladimir, the new Saint Volodymyr, because he is the one now who went back to Constantinople and kind of got this whole thing back, not on that day. I mean, this has been taking a couple of years to orchestrate, like I said earlier, this feat that was done. I mean, when he lost his Crimea, he wasn't a happy camper, you know. And as they started marching into the eastern part of Ukraine, he wasn't happy, you know. And then of course you have all the revolutions that were taking place, and the Maidan, and the whole civil war that was going on in Ukraine years ago. You know, he was through all of this, and he understood. You know, he was being elected, you know, towards the tail end of some of that, but he understood, and he still understands that this is his beloved Ukraine, and he doesn't want anything to happen. And then, of course, you know, you have people saying, well, he's doing this for political gain. And I think even my little article that I wrote about this, that he was, you know, doing this, his election was not going to take place without at least mentioning something about this Tomos, or, you know, what was going on. And so but I don't think in my own opinion that he used what happened with Bartholomew and this whole new Ukrainian Orthodox Church as any leverage. I mean, obviously it didn't do him any good. He lost. I mean, you know, but I don't think that was his agenda from word go, you know, anyways. But you know, he did travel around. When they got this Tomos, you know, we'll see later in pictures, it was a beautiful scroll, and he went city to city and let it sit, you know, for public view, and he went, you know, with that, but he used it, I guess, for his, I don't say advantage, but part of his campaign, I guess, but didn't get him anywhere. Yep.
Okay, given that there was a Tomos issued in 1924, and obviously the Ecumenical Patriarch is aware of that in its history, how does this new one then get issued, and how does it recognize or incorporate or assimilate or eliminate all, you know, of the above 1924? How do they relate to each other?
Good question. I mean, that's an excellent question, and I think I'm going to use one of my wild cards of I don't know. I don't know where it is. I mean, all the Tomoses, of course, the original ones are within the Patriarchate there in Istanbul. But it's like, what do they do with the other one? Do they just tear it up? Do they burn it? Please.
I think 1924 was issued to the Church of Poland, and at that time, Poland had significant land in what is now Ukraine.
Okay.
So
we think that's part of the whole
Right, so-
Polish.
Ethnographically loose.
Yeah. So like, you know, like Poland at that time, I guess interwar period would have had a lot of territory in Ukraine. Therefore, most of the Orthodox people in that land would have been Ukrainian.
Sounds right.
So I think, you know, after the war, then, or after World War II, you know, the borders of what is now Poland, Poland looks more like what it is now. So the current Orthodox Church of Poland would claim that as their Tomos, as to how they are now an independent church.
And I would suppose that
Thanks,
Eastern
Nick.
Ukraine was under the
Was always-
occupation of Moscow.
Yeah.
So that was the only place they could go. It wasn't until 1981
Right?
that was a game changer that made this possible.
And then maybe the Polish people still have it.
Right, so I think Metropolitan saw that Warsaw has it. I think that's-
Could be.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, hand up?
Well, as you stated earlier, it was declared non-canonical, so it has no standing whatsoever.
Well,
No,
not amongst Bartholomew.
Oh,
You know, maybe
That's
the-
the issue, yeah.
But yeah, you're right, I mean,
No, the appointments that were non-canonical, I thought were exclusive of 1924. They were done in addition to that.
who would that be, I'm sorry?
The two archbishops that you mentioned in the 30s
Okay.
were appointed and it didn't last very long. Those didn't have anything to do with 1924 at all, or did they?
In which bishops are we talking about?
Facilities.
The ones who were supposedly patriarchs.
Go back to the timeline, please. You mean,
One
the
more.
Metropolitan John and Metropolitan Mstislav?
Right.
Oh, no, technically, they were considered, you know, what, Metropolitan John was considered canonical, but Mstislav was not, because of just whole things of being ordained in the underground and whatnot. It wasn't until he came back to America, or came to America, that Mstislav over here, actually had the relaying on of hands, and which included, I don't think that was Athenagoras at the time, but
These bishops were taking their authority from the 1924 Tomos.
we can assume that, sure. It gets so, and I probably should have left in more of the history between some of these things, because I really cut out, this is probably just a third, the timelines are just about a third
Go back
of. the-
one more slide. No, I guess that was the slide.
Yeah. So, if you really, this is, I forgot what we called it, the timeline of, if you go back and on your computers,
The timeline of Orthodoxy in Ukraine.
that's exactly, if you Google this, a timeline of Orthodox in Ukraine, you're gonna get everything literally. I mean, there's no liberties that I took here of anything. These are exactly the statements they put in there, and it'll give a much, much more extensive, background. So I did shorten some of these up, but it might, behoove us to actually go back, and it's gonna list a little bit more of the information in there. But these are what I just took as like highlights of what I thought, would be like talking points.
But at the top level, the bishops that are in this timeline are the ones excluded. They're serving as bishops under the authority of, or recognized by the Constantinople.
Precise, yeah, they were always recognized by Constantinople.
Yeah, so,
Correct.
so this new Tomos could be considered an extension or continuation, or whatever word you want to use, of the 1924.
It could be,
institution.
sure.
I suppose you said you're coming up to a slide that'll show us what I believe were three groups, those under the new Tomos, the other.
It's not gonna
Independent church, and the Moscow
It
patriarch.
might not say it so plainly like that, but we're gonna see all the orthodoxies and how kind of each one fits into, you know, the sense of orthodox, and then who's with patriarchate and of Constantinople, and who's with the Moscow churches, and when I hope we included that slide at the end, so that's that circle one. Okay.
This is almost as bad as having three popes at once.
No, it is, no, seriously, I mean, it gets very confusing. All right.
And then we have four. and then-
So anyways, what's interesting is, this all started, you know, this public process, I should say, started, because all the other stuff was behind the scenes, but the public process all started right Monday, 2018. I think that's kind of ironic, and we're right Monday, 2019. So a lot has happened in a year, you know, and so this isn't just some, you know, fancy picture either of, you know, a generic. This is, you know, actually all that the Tomos that was written. It's on this huge scroll. I saw it on, I didn't see it in person, but there was a picture, I don't have it here, of when they unrolled all of this. I mean, how long all of these stipulations and these laws and whatnot, and the who's who, it's all in there. So, yeah, I already mentioned that the talks started as early as 2016. And I believe this Tomos states that the Ukrainian, this church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine, is number 15 now amongst Constantinople's churches. We became number 15 in all of that. So, and I think that's actually was written in there as well. That's the presentation of the Tomos here, and let's see, that's just a nifty picture, I guess. Okay, there we have, of course, Patriarch Bartholomew actually getting ready to sign the Tomos there with Metropolitan Epiphany looking on at him. And this was actually signed. What he's doing was January 5th of this year, and after the celebration of the Divine Liturgy, they brought out the table, they brought out the pens, and they began to sign. And this is when officially, January 5th, is when that OCU, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, took place and took title. And it's interesting because Patriarch Bartholomew, when he started writing, he's not on the Tomos, of course, but when he first started speaking, he started calling it the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And this is so typical of the Ukrainian Orthodox churches. You know, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Why? Those little words. And if you talk to any true Ukrainian, when you say the Ukraine, true Ukrainian goes nuts. You say the Ukraine, the Ukraine. No, it's not the. You know, this little simple word causes, you know, the worst of fights. Well, Bartholomew used the word Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. What does that denote? That denotes territory. And that almost denotes boundaries, and we're just the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. When you say we're the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, that's saying, you know, Ukraine only, I guess they said it makes it sound like there's only one Orthodox Church, you know, we're saying Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And that's where these things started already, you know, amongst the people, started these controversial things already. And it's like, holy smokes, this thing isn't even signed, and you're already fighting over in and of, and, you know, because in America, what? We are the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA, but there is a Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the USA. You know, and it's two separate Orthodox entities, and it's just like, you know, who's with who and who's with that. It just, why don't you guys all just want?
Well, I understand the implies that the Ukraine is a region
Precisely.
of Russia, as
Right.
opposed to an independent nation.
Yeah.
You'll see it with Lebanon, the Lebanese, the Bank of the Lebanon, as
Okay.
if it's still a part of Syria.
Right.
And it was never ancient Phoenicia, which was among the first
Yeah.
independent nations in the world.
But such little words can cause such wars, I guess, if you will. But yeah.
Literally, it's a question of
So,
sovereignty.
yes, exactly. Actually, and it was interesting, during this whole process, the Patriarch Bartholomew still actually, I read, was commemorating in that liturgy Patriarch Kirill of Moscow. You have to understand, before this, and I didn't really at all get into the subject, but Patriarch Kirill of Moscow had an audience with Patriarch Bartholomew, and the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, really tried very hard to say, don't do this, please don't do this. And he just, you know, this meeting was, I guess, over 2.5 hours long, and Bartholomew kept saying, I'm gonna do it, I mean, you can hear it, it's a Greek, Russian, and Ukrainian translator all kind of going at it, and they were copiously taking notes. I saw these translators, I'm thinking, you know, because these patriarchs were not slowing down for a second to let these translators catch up with what was being done. And here you're arguing these three languages, but what it said was boiled down to that Patriarch was trying to tell Bartholomew was trying to tell Kirill, listen, I still commemorate you. I still, I still pray for you. But Epiphanos, or Metropolitan Epiphany, I guess flat out, at that meeting said, I would never pray for you in liturgy. Now I'm thinking, okay, you better shut your mouth, because your boss, so to speak, Bartholomew, is looking at you saying he does this, and now you kind of are over here and say, well, I'm not gonna, you can pray for him, but we're not gonna pray for him. I'm thinking, okay, now that's really, and then they're gonna try, some other things to start getting at each other, and finally, as you know, or I don't know if you don't know, but Patriarch Kirill of Moscow got up and left. He just got right up and left. He had said, I had enough, 2.5 hours, that's enough, and I'm not getting through to you. You go, do what you gotta do, but we're done meeting. And so he left Constantinople, or I keep interchanging those. He left Istanbul, the Fener, and got back on his plane and went back home. But anyways, right now, that's, it's still not a good situation. As I mentioned earlier, these chips kind of also have to fall. Go back one, but that was just, I guess, him putting his original signature on the actual Tomos. That was that very final thing of liturgy that day. I just want to let you know, this is one of those fun facts. Tomos is actually, this wasn't photocopied. This wasn't done on the computer and you see the handwriting or something like that. There's your parchment, Father. There's your parchment paper. It actually was done on when I pulled up the other day, when I thought it was interesting, because nowadays you can Google anything and you say, how is the Ukrainian Tomos made? Well, on parchment by an Athonite higher monk iconographer by the name of Luke. And this monk Luke actually went and he hand-delivered very securely this Tomos to Bartholomew, who, of course, that's what they used. And this was all hand, done.
In the tradition of all the documents for a couple thousand years.
There you go. There you go. I mean, so obviously, I guess when I say local monk, it was a local to the Greeks, I guess, an Athonite monk, but not like a local monk that we would know here. Yeah. And there it is. This is at the Tomos placement while I sat there during liturgy. The Tomos is not a symbol of power, but a testimony of love, and for the unity of the Ukrainian people and the salvation of his faithful. That's the exact words of Patriarch Bartholomew. So, it all sounds good, right? I mean, what's he supposed to say? I mean, time will tell. Time will tell, like everything. I hope that his words are true and that he, continues in his brotherly love for everybody and actually reminds himself of what he said there during that liturgy to President Poroshenko and the rest of the Ukraine.
He was recently interviewed on 60 Minutes. He's made a lot of interviews lately, and he seems to be an extremely careful, thoughtful, wise individual, consummate politician in the best sense of the word. He understands that what he says will have ramifications, and he is extremely careful and politic in what he does so as to not cause any damage and do the best he can for the Christians he's trying to represent.
Right.
He's an impressive guy.
He is, and I've asked my hierarchs, especially my Metropolitan Antony. I'm a little bit closer to him than I am with Archbishop Daniel, just for other reasons that go way back from when I was a long time ago. But I said, how is he? How is this Patriarch Bartholomew? Like, well, he's a very serious man. He's a kind man, but very serious. I'm like, well, can you yuck it up with him? Can you tell him a joke? Does he tell you any jokes? He's like, no, there's none of that with him. I mean, but you think when they get behind closed doors, that's when I find out it's interesting. Even though Orthodox, I've always had an admiration, maybe because of the Slavic or whatever, for Pope John Paul II. I just had this fascination with the guy. I thought he was a very interesting life. I love World War II. I'm a World War II buff, and I love just hearing, and studying how the popes and whatnot went through different things during World War II, and with Cardinal Wojtyla, how he was, you know, I got fascinated. I was talking and reading more and more and more. Well, I came across Father Yaroslav Kowal in Arnold, in the church, you know, in the area that I'm at. Well, he studied in Rome with Pope John Paul, was not studied with him, but studied, or when he was studying there when John Paul was the Pope there. And I
You said he had lunch with him about 10 times.
and yeah, I can't help but ask these stupid questions to Brother Priest. I'm like, how was he? How was really Pope John Paul? Because I guess he had special nuns that would cook for him, but he would invite the seminarians over, and being that they were Ukrainian Catholic priests, they were never liked in Rome, but the Pope John Paul always took them in because they were married. Of course, they were given that dispensation to marry, and none of the other Romans, the priests in Rome cared for them. So the Pope took them in, and I'm like, how was he? And he's like, you know, Mark, the best thing he liked, hamburgers. He loved hamburgers and French fries. And these nuns would make him fresh hamburgers and French fries, and that's what he goes. That's what I had for lunch. He goes, you can't imagine the Pope sitting there in his white garb and just eating a hamburger with the ketchup just dripping everywhere. And he said, "Oh, takže dobře." The Pope said, "Oh, this is so good." And it's just like, wow. And then, so I don't know. I'm one of those freaks that I'm going to shake your hand and shook the hand and shook the hand. But that's how it is, and I think that's a beautiful aspect of Orthodox, or even just, you know, clergy and whatnot, because we're not that far removed from a lot of this. You know, I mean, like my friend Father Yaroslav, you know, had lunch with the Pope, and like, I'm just a lowly priest, but my bishop, you know, Archbishop Daniel, we're friends with, you know, we can sit and converse and whatnot and serve with one another, or Metropolitan Antoni, or Metropolitan, and yet, really, who's the next step? You know, you're already up to the ecumenical patriarch.
If anybody was ever truly destined for the position that he took, I think it was, Karol Wojtyla, because he understood both fascism, Nazism, and communism, Soviet communism, the worst parts of that close up.
Right.
He understood that he was part of the, soft underground of World War II, and then any Polish bishop at those times would have to deal with the Soviets constantly. And, a lot of people don't understand. He gave the backbone to Reagan and Thatcher to do what they did.
That's her. That's my daughter's. Like,
Yeah,
she's one of those that loves that
Or if
era.
it wasn't for those three, people don't know. Pope John Paul, St. Pope, he wrote a personal note to Gorbachev in his own hand.
Right.
When when Poland was breaking loose with solidarity, he said, "If you attack my homeland, I will resign the papacy and join my brothers on the barricades." And Gorbachev is like, this is the most powerful man, or the most popular man on earth. I can't have him dead at our guts.
Exactly.
He hesitated for a little bit, and that was it.
Yeah,
Next
right.
thing you know, the Berlin Wall's falling.
Precisely. Father and then father. Father.
Right now called A Pope and a President. I just finished it. It's fascinating. And it talks exactly about what you talked about. It goes to great depth, and it reads like a Tom Clancy novel. It's amazing.
Right.
Really good.
That's just one of my things. I love just Father Myron.
So, can you take us back to 1991? It's my understanding that after Ukrainian independence, that the ecumenical patriarch approached the Moscow Patriarchate and said, "Look, work this out." I don't know much about it. I heard this happen, they said, "We ain't gonna do it." Do you know anything about that? Can you talk about that?
No, I unfortunately I don't know a lot about that
It's
myself.
my understanding that they approached Moscow and said, "Come on, help work this out in Ukraine. This is the mother of Orthodoxy in Eastern Europe. Can't you guys work this out?" It was my understanding that they approached them. I don't know much
I'm sure it would be
about
nice if they did,
Yeah, because they had first dibs. to try
Yeah,
to work
right,
it out.
right.
You don't, it's kind of like having kids, right? If you don't settle down, I'll settle you down.
Yeah, right.
That's kind of what they did.
I don't think so.
Yeah, right.
Would allow that.
That's probably my second wild card. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to look. Cool. I got my timekeeper's like, she's doing the same thing she does in the first pew at church when I'm talking about one of these like things,
Usually I go like this.
Of course, here's our beloved Archbishop Daniel, and then this is Bishop Heleon of the Ukrainian Canadian Church. He's Bishop of Edmonton, and I think they call that what, I don't know Canada, what, Western?
Yeah, that would be Western.
That's what I thought. And so these were the two that were, I guess, exiles. These were the two that were appointed by Patriarch Bartholomew to come and, you know, you always need the men up front that do the work. These are the ones that rolled up their sleeve. These are the ones that went meeting after meeting after meeting, day after day after day after week after week, month after month, to finally get this Tomos. And now that they are holding it right there. And they worked very hard. They absolutely worked very hard. And believe it or not, I keep joking with my bishop because I think one of the kids are like, we were going through different slides, like, go back. And he's like, here's Bishop Daniel. This was years ago. Completely black hair, black beard, everything. This dude's younger than I am. I'm 48, and he's like 46 or 45 or 46, I think. And it's like, my God, I said, well, they aged you so bad. I mean, holy kites. I mean, the poor guy aged like a ton, but I guess, as I told him, well, heavy is the head who wears the crown, I guess. But anyways, all right, moving along quickly here. Metropolitan, or Patriarch Bartholomew, actually accepting the formal brotherly love kiss to Metropolitan Epiphany, and along with the Tomos that he is going to be presenting him, he's also handing him over now the staff. He's the 15th staff, if you will, being handed over to guard the flock now of Ukraine. Well, of Kiev and Ukraine. I had a blast with this when I was joking with my bishops. I'm like, what, y'all get thirsty up there on the altar? Isn't that what that looks like? What is it?
Gotta stay awake.
What is it?
Chrism? I know that's like one of the stipulations of the Tomos, that the Church in Kiev has to get chrism from Constantinople.
And that's a whole another day's worth of topic too.
Wow.
Who's going to consecrate our chrism?
Yeah.
Where are we going to get our holy chrism from? You know, but now Patriarch Bartholomew is like, now you are to use our recipe here from Constantinople. You are to use our brand. You are now given this. And I guess this was the official bottle, but this was one of those at midnight, hurrying up, texting my Metropolitan and told me, I said, what are y'all doing in that one? And then they're like, he's giving them chrism, and hundreds of these bottles were packed and sent to Ukraine and are now being distributed amongst all the proper authorities, hierarchical authorities, I should say, in Ukraine to now be distributed. So, I don't know. It's pretty, right? The gold, the pageantry, the robes. I don't know. I think it was worth mentioning. Beloved Bishop Daniel, Archbishop Daniel again, having probably one of his quiet moments with Poroshenko, probably saying, is this all over yet? But what he's doing is, President Poroshenko is actually congratulating Bishop Daniel and giving him this little box here, which is actually the, it's a state award given to your people who, distinguished honor, distinguished service to the people, and
Like the Medal of
service.
Freedom.
Yeah, and it's called the Order, the Medal of Yaroslav the Wise, which was going all the way back from ancient times, around the 988 era. All right.
Now, what the ecumenical patriarch giveth, can he take away, or once that is given, okay, the church is on its own, the Ukrainian Synod is going to elect the next patriarch, or can Bartholomew or his successor come back in and,
We can elect out who we want now, but it all has to get funneled through Bartholomew
okay,
for his
he has
blessing.
to sign off.
Precisely.
Okay.
Exactly. All right, yeah, the actual thing was called Distinguished Service to the, you're going so fast ahead of me, jeez. I guess that's Mom telling you to hurry up. Distinguished Service to the State and the People of Ukraine.
It's always
All right, this is one of the most recent ones, February 2019. Our dear President Poroshenko comes back, and now he's in southbound Brook, New Jersey. This is our Metropolitan Antony. This is now the fourth hierarch. We had, remember, John Teodorovich, then we had Mstislav, and then we had Constantine of blessed repose, and now he is the 4th primate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in America, Metropolitan Antony. And I guess I'll just share with you real quick the reason why I can text him at midnight and still get away with it, because he used to babysit me when I was this big back in Chicago. He was my parish priest, and he is the one. If it wasn't for him, I probably would not be here today. And as my grandmother would go to make the pierogies in the church, he would take me, because my parents went to work, and then my grandmother watched me, and we were at the hall, and he would every Friday take me back to his place, set this little cot up, and he'd let me take a nap and just rest a while. And so he's kind of almost like an uncle, I would call him. And so, I don't know, a very remarkable man, and I have utmost respect. And what was the neatest thing is when I told him I'm moving from Chicago to Pittsburgh, he was like, you just tell me when you're gonna get married to her, and I'll be there. And he performed our wedding, and actually my wife knows it long because he hails from Sharon, Pennsylvania, actually.
Oh, no kidding?
He's a native of Sharon. Anyways, so that's the scoop there. They were visiting the President Poroshenko was visiting Baum because they were commemorating what they called the Heavenly 100, the people who perished back in February of 2014 in one of the Ukrainian revolutions on the Maidan, in the square in Ukraine. And then that's literally when the Russians just came and started shooting them all down. And I mean, there's more than 100, but they call them the Sotny and the Besny, the Heavenly 100, but there are many, many more that were killed. But he came to America. I asked the Metropolitan, he didn't come here just for that. No, he was actually speaking at the UN earlier that morning too, and he decided to stop in Bolingbrook. And so, therefore, where was I going with that? South Bolingbrook and New York City are literally probably half an hour to 45 minutes from one another. So he swung on over, and I thought, well, that was nice of him. So there you have it. Yeah, I think that's what I have for that. All right, we're going to go real quick through the next one because I want to get through this one inner. Just for the sake of statistics, because to appease my wife, who's a mathematician, I look at charts and numbers, I cringe and run. But Ukrainska Pravoslavna said, this is the Kievan, this is from the year 2000 to 2018. So just for the sake of looking, this is the Ukrainian, the numbers of the Ukrainian, this is like 2000 all the way up to 2018, but these are the numbers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate. You can see their numbers were going up and up and up through the years. And then you have the Moscow Patriarchate, Ukrainian Orthodox, kind of gives in millions the numbers. And here, way down here, these are our autocephalous people. That's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, autocephalous Orthodox Church, which I find amazing. It's God's providence, because the lowest amount of people, that's who, that's who is chosen now as the backers of this new formed church in Ukraine. And I love this in Ukraine. It is called Prosto Pravoslavne. The ones who just simply call themselves Orthodox, not under Moscow, not under Kiev, not under autocephalous. These, I think, are the people that go to church because they're God-fearing. They don't care who they're under. God is not Russian or Kievan or anything like that. He's just these are just the people that go to church, and those numbers are quite large, if not the largest. And then even better, the Niznayu people. I don't know what the hell I am. That's just, no, really. I don't know what I don't know what I am. God help me figure it out, right? But anyway.
So the lowest one is the new church from the Tomos.
This is the one
2019
that is now brought in the Kievan people, and I hope the regular Orthodox people also are now part of this, and maybe the Niznayu people moved on over too. I don't know, but definitely. But see, these belong to the Moscow Patriarchate here. But I also read articles and talked to my bishops, and these are also people that they go to church. They might call themselves, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, but I don't think there's a portrait of Putin in their church or something like that they go to see. I think that's just what their church happened in that village be. It might just be, they were all Ukrainian Orthodox at one time, and they all are still Ukrainian Orthodox, but who are we going to pray for when it comes time to, putting them in the diptychs or whatever, So, anyway, that's a simple little chart. Real quick, and then because I really want to get to this little interview by Bishop Daniel, The next one, this is where I was hoping might clarify some things, but it's probably only gonna muddy it even further. And I wish, I should have brought this forever, but you have your Constantinople Church here, and it's written in horrible green, but here's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, here's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA. How, this is the most recent chart, by the way, but that's how now, it starts talking about how the other churches fit into Constantinople, but you still have your Antioch churches, your Patriarch of Alexandria and Jerusalem. The Romanians have their own patriarch. Russia has their own patriarchs. Cyprus, Serbia, Georgia. I mean, that's how many, which, I can't, it's like really, really weird. And I tried for the, it's very hard to find, where was it? Oh, I lost my thought. I'm sorry. I don't think this helps, and I don't know if this goes back to what you were trying to ask with your question earlier, but once again, you can, this is one of the charts that I found out there that kind of explains some, answers that I was looking for, but you go once again on Google and you pull up Orthodox, what do we look at? Orthodox jurisdictions or something like that, and you'll find that.
So I'm assuming the 14 Brown are patriarchal level churches. They have a patriarch.
That's right.
Okay. So obviously those that are under the Moscow patriarch on the lower left, those are jurisdictions that are going to support, the Moscow point of view. And so my question is, of these other patriarchal churches here, is there a clear understanding of, say, are the Romanians, backing the Russian or the Constantinople point of view? Is the Patriarchate of Jerusalem backing the?
Well, that's one of those, I think, what we talked about earlier. Romania has its own patriarch, just like Serbia, but yet they kind of respect Constantinople, and I know for a fact that Constantinople gives Romania and Serbia, for example, that chrism, that to distribute.
Well, to
and
make the question finer and more to the point. If I were to ask the Patriarch of Romania, do you agree with the Tomos issued by Constantinople? Is he going to say yes or no?
No, he will say no.
Okay, can we do that in all those circles?
Well, this is an old thing, but as I mentioned before, Poland said no when this all started. When Kirill hopped his plane to Constantinople to tell Bartholomew, don't do it, Poland said, we back you, Kirill. Absolutely not. Going back to all that stuff. But now, recently, I just read an article, Poland changed its stance and said, we agree with you now. Ukraine should have its own. And so,
Albania?
I wish I knew each and every one of them. Is that a special one to you?
No, so let's go around the circle. Which ones?
We could go around, yeah.
Which ones do you know how they stand?
If you give me 2 seconds here. I don't know a lot. I was doing your same question. Okay, these are the ones as of now. Yeah, you're Albania. Okay, your Greece. These are the ones with Constantinople that some that I just was trying to, but I ran out of time simply. I know Greece agrees with Constantinople, Poland agrees, Albania, Czechia, or Czech, is Czech?
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia.
Okay, well back then, okay, Czech, and they call themselves Czechia now. Slovakia is with them. And then of course all of these do, Estonia, Finland, what is that? North American, Belarusian, the Belarus.
I think Antioch is with the Moscow Patriarchate.
They put, see, and you can even pull up separate countries and put jurisdictions, because Russia has a whole heck of a lot more. Here you have your ROKOR, you have your OCA, you have, it even breaks down even more. Here it is. Go to, what did we decide that was, Anna? Bible.Canada?
It's Canada, so CA.
www.bible.canada, CA.
CA is Canadian.
So, and you might get a better breakdown of it. I tried to pick one of the most basic ones, so. Once again, I hate charts. Especially when they're old too, but
The
I couldn't
Antiochian
find.
Orthodox Church is heavily involved in the Middle East, especially Syria. Syria still exists as a state because of Russia's support of the regime. The Antiochians, as Christians in Syria, want the Ba'athist Assad regime in the person of
Right.
Bashar al-Assad to stay in power. Why? Because like Saddam Hussein, they don't care about religion. They care about staying in power. And Christians and other minorities
Right.
are given good treatment
Right.
because they can be trusted as minorities to toe the line because they're getting protection. So because Russia is instrumental in keeping the regime that protects the Christians in power, the Antiochian Church doesn't support the ecumenical patriarch.
And I find that.
But Moscow. It's not about politics.
Yeah, and I got all introduced to that back in '93 when I was in college back, and it was like an Antiochian Orthodox Church, and they were talking about before how their bishops, I forgot, there was a Bishop Michael and a Bishop Antun, and all these bishops, and I got to talking to them, and it's just like, wow, this is the same in our church. These bishops were very political. In fact, I think this Bishop Michael was found dead in his apartment mysteriously from unknown causes.
It's a matter of
you know,
survival.
Yeah, and I'm thinking your bishops really are just like ours. You just insert, Syria, Lebanon here, insert the word Ukraine here, and but it wasn't until I came to this area, and especially in Arnold, where I am, you don't call them down the street from me the St. George's Antiochian Orthodox Church. They are St. George's Syrian Orthodox Church. All go funneling up to the same area, but you don't call us an Antioch at all. We are the Syrians. And it's like, wow,
In a lot of these countries, Christians often serve in the mukhabarat, the secret police,
Okay. Yeah.
because they're trusted to support people that support them. And if the dictator goes out of power, they suffer.
Yeah.
People forget Saddam Hussein's right-hand man was a Chaldean Catholic,
Okay.
Tariq Aziz.
Okay. Yes.
We're a little bit over. so
Okay, we're gonna have 3 more
we're gonna
minutes.
Wrap it up.
Okay. This was a last-minute feature that I added on here only because I got to. Literally, I am sitting right here, and Bishop Daniel's kind of marching back and forth, talking to a few other people. But I thought, oh my gosh, what he's saying is really good stuff. So with my electronics, fumbly knee, the features, the coffee cup. But that's neither here nor there. This is really good, though. This conversation, it shows how humble that all these bishops are. Well, in my estimation.
But to make a long story short, we have one of the best gifts as Ukrainian Orthodox Christians that we could have received.
This was about 4 weeks
the
ago.
lives of your foreparents, four moms and 4 dads and 4 fathers and 4 mothers that have come to the United States of America. You think about it. About 100 years ago, your parents, your relatives, have come to this country not only for political reasons, for economical reasons, but also because they wanted to have their own church experience. They wanted to pray in a language that they understood, and that's why they built the churches that we have in the United States of America, like St. Peter and Paul, like here in Youngstown, we're in Pennsylvania, forgetting that we crossed the border, and all the other parishes
Traffic to make
across the
borders.
country. And it is because of their faith that we were able to persevere here in the United States of America and to preserve our culture, preserve our religious identity. But people in Ukraine, they didn't have a chance to do that. It was destroyed. It was removed from their life. I told you several years ago when I came for this retreat, I even grew up without church experience. I was baptized in the basement of somebody's priest's house. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, church came into existence again. And yet the complication of the institution started coming right to the front of it all. Canonical, not canonical, right, not right, of Russian tradition, of Greek tradition, of Slavic tradition, and whatever else. And as a result of it, people have been lost in this whole process. I'm very grateful to ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, to be very honest. that he took the interest and the time and listened to the appeal of about 42 million Ukrainians that have asked, can we at some point have our own Orthodox Church of Ukraine? And right in the middle of the opposition that came from the Russian Orthodox Church and other churches, he decided enough is enough. 27 years of persecution, and 7 years before, and hundreds of years even before that, are enough for the people of Ukrainian descent to suffer. And so, back in the fall of last year, and then in the January of this year, the Tomos, the document of independence, was granted. And now, we here in the United States of America, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in diaspora, we have a Eucharistic union with our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. If you go to Ukraine, you don't have to worry about any longer which church I'm supposed to go to commune, which is canonical, which is not canonical. Every single religious community, any Orthodox church that's there, you can actually go, talk to the priest, and participate in the holy mysteries of the church.
Where you can't participate is here. Ukraine is all one now. You can walk in any of the churches, you're Orthodox. This was my worst Lent that I've ever had as a priest. Because we get letters we can celebrate Sunday of Orthodoxy together. All of us, big parade, entourage of Orthodox priests. Now, they couldn't decide who's going to hold it. Well, if the Greek church is going to have it, the Serbians aren't coming. And if the Serbian church had it in Monroeville, then your Antiochians aren't going to come. And then us poor Ukrainians are just stuck like little orphans in the middle. And you know what we got a letter that said? You Ukrainians, because of what has been in the last few weeks, in the last few months, has created this unrest, if you will. You may come to these services and participate in the fashion of sitting in the first pew. Now, really? That's what I went this for? To sit in the first pew? You don't tell clergymen to sit in the pew if they wish to serve. But my point is, fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and everybody here, who's suffering but the church in America? We have to figure out now, what do we do? You know, thank God I've had strong ties with my brother Orthodox priests around the Pittsburgh and other areas in the United States where we are friends first and we are brothers first. So just because last year we can share the same chalice and all of a sudden this happened and now, no, you can't drink from that same chalice. What did Mark change? What did I change? No. Did you? No. But these parameters that are put on us. And I know I wasn't going to badmouth, but I just wanted to tell you that when I said my worst Lent is because they couldn't decide this year where to hold the services. So we're going to have a different jurisdiction, have a different church. I think the Serbians started it off, and then there was Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Carnegie that had it, and then there was the Antiochians in Bridgeville, Serbs in Monroeville, and then the Greeks in McKeesport. So everyone took a turn, but what was interesting, instead of singling out the Ukrainian Orthodox, then they said, well, each jurisdiction is just going to serve on the altar that church is having. So only the Serbs served at the Serb church, only the Ukrainians served in the Ukrainian church on their Sunday. And it's just like, this is what Orthodoxy is about. But forgive me if I offended. I tend to do that sometimes. I kind of shoot from the hip, and I sometimes get carried away. But I did not mean to offend anybody here this evening on some personal views, or sometimes my slang gets me in trouble sometimes. But that's what I know, and it's just simple. I think Bishop Daniel, I should have probably played him first, because he put it, I think, so eloquently, and it was just by God's grace that I was able to even know how to turn my phone on within 3 seconds to start taping him. But I think he really summed it up right there. And this dude, he's been with it since since the very beginning of all this, and put himself right there in the first and forefront, and that's what it is. So thanks for listening, folks, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming out this evening, and I know I went over, but I was so worried that I wasn't going to be able to talk long enough. But thanks for that.